Hello everyone, Miss Carrie here. Today I'll be demonstrating 4 of my favorite embroidery stitches for paper crafting. Plus, I'll be sharing my favorite tips to make the process simple and enjoyable. I'm working with the Good Vibes kit from Hip Kit Club. This has a gorgeous boho feel with soft hues and simple patterns and background prints. In the main kit, you receive 12 two-sided pattern papers, glittered mini epoxy shape stickers, cardstock ephemera, puffy phrase stickers with large titles and these little phrases, chipboard stickers, and puffy alphabet stickers. On this project, we'll be adding some embroidery stitching, so I've grabbed this amazing collection of dies. These circle dies cut out 6 shapes total. I'll show you what those die cuts look like in a moment. Each time I share a technique with you, my goal is to inspire you to use the supplies you already own. But if you wish to purchase these stitching dies or the main kit, I have a discount code for you to use. In the description below is the code and a link to the Hip Kit site. Let's get started with the project. I'm going to start by cutting out the circle shapes with my die cut machine. This is the largest circle shape, and it will cut out the circle shape with the holes that we're going to be using for stitching. I'm going to cut 2 of each of the circle shapes. 2 of the larger ones from blue, 2 of the medium size from orange, and 2 of the smaller size from a soft pink color. Now that all the circles have been cut, I'm going to place the scallop die cuts onto a piece of white cardstock. This has been trimmed down to 11 inches so that I can add a frame around it later. When you adhere the circles in place, make sure that there are no partial stitching holes going off the edge of the page. This is going to make it difficult to add stitching. I also recommend that you use a liquid adhesive. Adhesive from a tape runner or double-sided tape can gum up your embroidery needle. Now that all the pieces are in place, I'm going to add some stitching guides between the scallop circles. The dies make a great template for circular stitching. I'm just going to line this up with the scallop shape, then use a die piercing tool to make the holes for my embroidery floss. Under my paper, I have a piece of self-healing craft foam. This is about 1/4 inch thick and can be purchased on just about any crafting site. Once you've finished adding all the circular stitching guides to the top and bottom of the page, take some time to pierce the holes in the scallop circles as well. This will make it much easier to add your stitching. Alright, now it's time to add our embroidery. I have 3 embroidery floss colors that match my cardstock. I'll share each of these DMC floss colors in the description below. I also have a size 14 embroidery needle. These have a larger eye, a pointed tip, and they're long enough for my large fingers to hold on to. I also recommend that you have some embroidery wax on hand. Embroidery wax tames the thread and makes the threads more manageable to work with. Inside this plastic case is a circle of beeswax. Let me try to get this open. It is stuck pretty tight. There we go. You can see here that there's some little indentions at the top of the beeswax. That's where I've been running my thread through. Now I'll show you how this works here in a moment. Most embroidery floss has 6 strands of thread. As I pull this apart, you're able to see how thin they are. Now, because I enjoy adding stitching to projects, I have created a little cheat sheet for myself. This helps me see the correlation between the number of threads used and the thickness of the stitches. I also use other flosses, cords, and thread, so I keep those on this card as well, but I mostly use it as an embroidery floss guide. The stitching holes on these scallop circles are larger, so I'll probably be using 3 or more strands of floss. Let's separate our thread strands into a set of 4 and a set of 2. I like to use a needle to separate them, and then I carefully pull them apart and place my finger between the 2 bundles to prevent tangling. You can also pull one thread at a time and gather the number of threads needed into a bundle, but this is much faster. Once these are separated, the floss becomes a little fuzzy and the threads are separating. This is where that beeswax comes in handy. To strengthen the thread and help it cling together, I'm going to run this through the thread wax. I just pull the floss through and it adds a light coating of wax to the floss. This will also make it easier to stitch and it creates less tangles, twisting, and splitting. To thread the needle, I'm using a wire threader. This is a little loop of wire that's pushed through the eye of the needle. Then you insert the thread through the wire loop, pull the loop back out, and the loop pulls the thread through the needle's eye. Let's go ahead and add our stitching to those circles. I'm going to start in the second hole and pull my floss through until I have about a 1 to 2 inch tail on the back of the paper. I do not add knots on the end because that's going to cause a little bump in the paper. Instead, I'm just going to tape this to secure it in place. We're going to create a simple running stitch. I'm going to push my needle back to the front into that first hole, then bring it back up into the third hole, then down into the fourth hole, up through the fifth, and down through the sixth. This is going to create a stitch in every other space. With paper projects, you want to pull the floss taut, but not so tight that you rip your paper. I'm going to continue this stitch all the way around the scallop circles. When we get to the last stitch, we're going to push the needle through to the back, then secure it by wrapping the floss into a few of the stitches on the back side. I also like to place some tape over the top to secure it in place. Snip off the excess thread and you have your first circle of embroidery stitches. For the second row of circles, I'm going to show you how to make a stem stitch. This creates more of a solid line of stitching. You're going to start in the third hole, pull your thread through just like before, and secure that tail on the back with some tape. Once it's secured, you're going to push the needle down into the first stitching hole, then bring it through the fourth stitching hole. Pull the floss all the way through, then we're going to go back into that second stitching hole, and I like to put the needle on the outside of the previous stitch. I'm going to show you that again. We're going to bring the needle up through the next stitching hole. We're going to skip over one of the stitching holes and put our thread down into the next one. This time I'm going to put my needle on the inside of the previous stitch. Now this one is a little bit more of an advanced stitch, so we're going to do it one more time. Bring the needle up through the next stitching hole, skip over one of the piercing holes and push the needle down into the next one. This time I placed the needle on the outside of the previous stitch. Now you can see how this is creating a nice solid line, but our starter stitch there is unfinished. So I need to go back and finish that. I'm going to bring my needle up through the second hole and I'm going to wrap this around the end of my paper, and then I'm going to bring that needle up through the next stitch that I need to create. This is going to finish off that end. I am going to continue the stem stitch all the way around and finish it off like I did before. Then I'll add a running stitch to each of the scallop circle shapes and add this stem stitch in between. So off camera, I added all the embroidery stitches and I love how this looks. In the smaller circles, I added these little bursts. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. I adhered my photos in place. I framed them with some lighter blue cardstock. Behind the larger photo, I brought in a plaid pattern. I also added stitching with my sewing machine to the diamond pattern to bring some texture to this area of the page. I'm going to add a few of the die cuts and chipboard shapes from the kit to the design. This little film strip element has some cute little phrases that are perfect for these photos. And then I'll add this little frame over here to bring some weight to this side of the page. I also need to create some balance in my design with another circle shape, so I'll add this banner below the photo. Now I have a nice visual triangle of like shapes. For my journaling, I'm going to build a pocket on the back of the small photo. This consists of 2 pieces of paper with thin foam tape between. I'll add some adhesive to the back of the pocket, and once this is in place, the tag will sit right inside and can be removed to read the story. These 2 girls met each other in Brownies and Girl Scouts. Once they entered middle school and high school, they lost touch, which happens sometimes. Now that they're both grown, their friendship has rekindled. And this little phrase here that says soul sisters fits them so well. Before I add a title to my page, I'm going to layer some embroidered flowers around those little circle shapes. These were cut using the Stitchable Flowers die set. The die set comes with 3 flower sizes and 3 leaf sizes with stitching guides. Let me show you a few more embroidery stitches and how I use those on these flowers. I'm going to start with the leaves first. This is called a back stitch. I'm going to start in the second stitching hole. I'm going to bring my needle up. I'm going to push the needle down into the first hole, then come back up into the third and stitch back down into the second. The back stitch creates a nice line of stitches because we're going over those stitches twice on the back and it adds bulk to the stitching. I'm going to continue this back stitch all the way down the center of the leaf. I'm going to secure this real quick and then I'll show you the stitches that I added to the flowers. These smaller flowers are going to layer atop the larger one, so there was really no point in adding stitching to the center. But I wanted something on the petals. I decided to add stitches in between. I'm going to bring the needle up through a hole that's closest to the indent between the 2 petals. Then I'm just going to wrap the floss around to the back. To secure it tight, we're going to add the next stitch on the opposite side. I'm going to bring the needle up into the hole that's between 2 petals. Then I'll wrap it back around to the back and pull it tight. This is one of the simplest ways to add some embroidery floss to flowers. The small flower is going to have a sunburst in the center. This is very similar to the stitch that I added in the center of the smaller scallop circles on the layout. For this, I'm only using 2 strands of thread because I want to create a delicate stitch. I'm going to start by piercing a hole in the center of the flower. If you're worried about poking your finger, you might want to place this onto a foam mat first. We're going to bring that needle up through one of the die stitching holes. I'm going to push the needle down into that center piercing hole that we just created. You're going to pull that floss tight and then create the same stitch in the second die stitching hole. It looks a lot like bicycle wheel spokes as you go around the flower. Now, as I finish this, I would love it if you took a moment to let me know that you enjoyed today's project by tapping the thumbs up icon or leaving a comment below. I truly enjoy teaching you new ways to create embellishments for your scrapbook pages and card making projects. Now, if you enjoy my teaching style, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel as well. Each week I post new projects for you to try. I'd love to know what you plan to try on your next project. Now all I have to do is pop these flowers in place. I'm going to layer the two flowers together with some foam tape, and then I'll adhere them up here on the circle. This smaller flower will layer right above it, and then I'll bring in my leaves. Now I am going to make sure that the larger leaf touches that pattern paper near the photo. I find that connecting elements on my layout creates flow in my designs. I'm going to finish adhering everything down to my page, add a title, and then I'll share the completed layout with you. Here is the layout we created today. After I adhered the flowers in place, I added some of those cute glitter epoxy hearts to the center. This color matches the letters that I use for the title. I also brought more of that color to the page with some glitter dots near my embellishment clusters. As you can see, I brought in another layer of flowers to the banner here and a butterfly. I also added an arrow, a rainbow, and a few hearts. This one here is chipboard, and the one near the Soul Sister phrase is a puffy heart. After adding the Stay Golden title with the puffy letters and a puffy heart, I added the phrase, "You are one of a kind and don't forget it." To finish off the page, I added a twine bow to the tag, and now all it needs is a little bit of journaling. Many of you have requested some stitching tutorials, so I thought I would start with 4 basic stitches that I use on my layouts. I also shared a few tips and tricks to simplify paper embroidery and make the experience more enjoyable. I would love to know if you enjoyed learning these techniques and which embroidery stitch you plan to use on your next project. If you're one who enjoys pinning projects to inspiration boards, I've added still shots of this layout to my Pinterest boards, website, and my social media posts for you to use. I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope this project inspired you to try something new. If you have any questions about this project or the supplies I used, feel free to post those in the comments below. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.